And the voice that was like a ghost in the background of this story that's unfolding in my dream was, it's all in the words, but you must impress the words.
Wow.
And it kept saying it. This voice kept saying, it's all in the words, but you must impress the words. And I just remember in my dream thinking, what the hell does that mean? It's all in the words, you must impress the words. It made no sense to me whatsoever. And then the dream moved on a little bit, and he took the bracelet, and it's on the little girl's wrist now. And he said to her, press that bracelet down in the middle and hold it for 10 seconds, which she did. And then she just removed her finger and just sat there looking at the old man. And he said, now move the bracelet away from that spot and reveal what's underneath the bracelet. And she looked down, and the word belief was in her wrist, as like imprinted in the skin, pressed into the skin. And he said, what does that word say, to the little girl? And she said, it says belief, sir. And he said, where is the belief? And she said, it's on my skin, sir. And he said, no. He said, the belief's not on you. The belief is in you. That's all you ever needed.
Welcome to another Digital Rapport podcast. I'm Jatinder Palaha, and on today's episode, I have the amazing Mark Baker, who's a sought-after speaker who captivates audiences with his authenticity and empathy. He's an author of 2 books, The Unbreakable Spirit and The Imprint Phenomena, and he's the inventor of the Imprint bracelet, which empowers individuals to develop empowering beliefs. Welcome, Mark. Welcome to the Digital Rapport podcast.
Good morning, Jatinder. It's fantastic to be here.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to chatting to you. And like with this podcast, the first question I usually ask is, what is rapport to you?
Rapport, I would say that it's really connecting with other people and understanding people's feelings and connecting with people on an emotional level that you're able to communicate and feel close to that person. That would be my definition of rapport.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And before we started the podcast, we were talking about how you sharing a bit about your journey, about how you went from like not really you were in sales and marketing, right? And you started off and you were not so great at it, and then you became really good at it. And let's talk a bit about that, because I think it's so relevant for people to hear how you went through that journey and started building rapport.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've just written another speech for a TED talk that I'm going to be doing soon. And so you've just kicked off something that I actually kicked that off with, because I was always a very ambitious person, but I was physically and mentally abused and tortured for much of the first 20 years of my life. And my father told me every single day, you'll never amount to anything and no one will ever want you. So that created the worst kind of beliefs within me: hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a bit of a curse to have those kind of beliefs about yourself and be ambitious, because you set these great big lofty goals, which I was always a prolific goal setter. I had such great dreams to change the world, but because of those innate subconscious beliefs I had, being hopeless, helpless, and worthless, and basically suffering from chronic imposter syndrome, it meant I never followed through on anything. So the ambition coupled with the lack of belief I had in myself was actually really crippling. So I saw this advert in the paper. I was actually going away traveling with friends of mine. I was a trainee manager at a supermarket, and I'd made this plan with friends of mine to go traveling across Europe. There was 4 of us were going to go. We'd bought a VW camper van. I'd packed in my job. The camper van was all packed up, and we were all ready to go on the boat the following morning. And they all came to my house at 7 o'clock, and they'd all basically chickened out and they weren't going anymore. So I had to cancel the trip. I couldn't really go by myself, and I was only a part owner of the vehicle. So they wanted to get their money out of it, so I couldn't even go if I wanted to. So I had to start looking in the paper for a job, and I saw this advert that says, become a financial advisor and earn £23,000 a year, which I'd only been, this was going back to 1988. So I was actually only earning £120 a week at the time. So that was like mega wealth to me at that stage. Mm-hmm. So I went for the interview and got the job, which wasn't really that much of an achievement, because in the life insurance industry at the time, they recruited people by the throw mud at the wall and see what sticks. So I was actually taken on with 19 people. And then what normally happens is 3 to 6 months later, they've all left the industry because they've sold out all to all their family and friends. They don't know how to prospect. They don't know how to sell. So once they've gone through their friends and family, they can't sell anymore. So at the end of 6 months, I was the only one left. And I think that was probably more out of stupidity at the time because I was chronically bad at it. The industry average at the time was £16,000 a year in sales and a sale a week, which is exactly what I was doing. I was having 10 meetings a week, and I was only selling one sale a week, which I couldn't afford to really live off because, and it was so bad that I used to have bags of food hung on my door handle because I had 2 little girls. I was been married a few short years. I had 2 little beautiful children, and I basically couldn't afford to feed them. I mean, if it wasn't for that couch with never ending money down the back of the couch, I'm not quite sure what I would have done. But I decided I was so frustrated. Like I said, I was so ambitious, but I had such chronically low belief about myself. But I just physically couldn't afford to carry on in that vein, whereby that I was just embarrassed because I was humiliated, having food left on the doorstep. Technically, it was as a man looking after a family, that's it's just unspeakable. It's the embarrassment and humiliation of that. So I thought, right, okay, look, if I'm going to stay in this, I'm going to have to really get to the bottom of this. I can't afford to see 10 people a week and make one sale. So I analyzed the 10 people a week I was seeing, and I realized that it was all down to the effects of the imposter syndrome and the belief I had in myself that was causing the problem. Because the underlying belief that I had was that I wasn't good enough. So I was terrified about meeting a prospect that knew more than me about what I did. So my antidote to that was to study all the product brochures and all the technical specifications. So when I go and sit down with the likes of yourself, I'd be quoting allocation rates, and which is okay. You should be using data as well, but not just data. But these were just pure data presentations, whole of life term insurance, decreasing term insurance, convertible term insurance. And I'd go on like this for half an hour and say, okay, Jatinder, what would you like to do? And you'd say, well, I want to think about it, because you had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't give you anything to make a decision on, because I've just made you confused and your eyes were glazed over with little or no understanding of what I've just tried to put across to you. But it was just this lack of belief and imposter syndrome that was causing me to overcompensate with technical specifications and no real connection at all, just purely dumping data on people. So I looked at when I got to the one sale I was making a week, I realized that I wasn't talking about data with those people at all. So I ran over the last several months, and the one that had this, it was the same thing with every single client, 9 heavy data presentations. And the one person I'd sold, it was always a person I felt comfortable with, that I didn't feel threatened by. And I didn't share any data with them at all. I told them stories. I told them stories about how I knew somebody that was in the same position as then, had a couple of young children, and that he died without life insurance, the family lost the home, and people could relate to that. I'm telling a story that's directly relatable to them, because they could be that person tomorrow. And I've seen that happen so many times. So those people buy into the story, and there's a lot of stuff happening there. It's just not the simplicity of the story. It was the emotional connection. It makes people feel something. It paints a picture for them. It touches them on so many levels that they can relate to. And they are, when you do this with story and you connect with people emotionally, they are just compelled to do what you're doing, because it makes sense. It's not hypnotism or anything. It's just really the way we're supposed to communicate. Because we're taught in business that, we're too sophisticated for that. Telling stories. We're taught that we're too sophisticated and that we've got to be data. Like, we've all been through death by PowerPoint presentations, where everyone's eyes are glazed over, and we're taught this is the way to do business, but it isn't. It's good to do data. You have to do data, but it should be interwoven with a story and the principles of story, and that's what actually helps us. It's in their best interest. It's in our best interest. That's how we make our money. That's how we protect them, or that's how they can get to enjoy the services that we offer. And hopefully all the services that anyone listening to this is offering someone is in their best interest. So it's really important. I'd say it's actually the secret weapon of communication now. As you know, I teach this extensively, so I've gone off a little bit of a point there. So just going through a bit further. So when I realized what I was doing wrong, I stopped it completely, and I just told stories to everybody. I gave them data, but I changed it to 70% storytelling and 30% data and figures and technical aspects of a policy. And I started to sell 8 out of 10 people.
Oh.
So I went from 1 out of 10 to 8 out of 10 just by changing the way I communicated with people. And something miraculous happened, because this was the end of March. I did this analysis of how I did business, and I'd done nothing. I'd probably earned about £4,000 by the end of March. That's gross. And the tough thing about life insurance is that you get paid the commission up front, but if it's cancelled within 4 years, you have to give the money back, or a percentage of it. So if you cancel the policy after 12 months and it's a 4-year commission period, and I earned £1,000, I'd have to pay back £750.
Wow.
So you can find yourself for months not getting paid. But as a result of how I changed my tack of doing business, I went from that, a typical industry standard of doing hardly anything, to the top 1% in the world in 9 months. In the last 9 months, from March till December, I became one of the top 1% in the world in the industry, purely on what I've just shared with you. And I went from 16,000 a year to that year I did £282,000 gross commissions. And in the May of that year, as I've just chatted to you about before it came on, in May, which was March, April, is the second month of doing this, I did £80,313 in gross commissions, which was about 7 years commissions, based upon how I was doing business just 8 weeks before. So that's how I turned myself around, and that was my background in the life insurance industry.
Wow, that's amazing. So you just like one day thought, what am I doing wrong? And you just start analyzing what you were doing, and just started noticing this kind of pattern in that, and thought, let me just adjust this to see what happens if I start sharing stories with others. And it actually worked.
Oh, and it actually worked monumentally. I mean, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I was aware that I was doing the same thing over and over again and getting the same result. And I thought, well, I physically, you see, I couldn't. It's not something I could ignore. I couldn't feed my family. So I really had to get to the root of what my problem was. And when I did that, it just, the inspiring thing about that is, I'm not saying that to impress you. I'm just saying to impress upon you. That's how fast we can change our lives. If we're doing, I've got a friend, he just never gets any further on, but he doesn't change anything that he does. He keeps doing the same thing over and over again. And you've got to, at some stage, you've got to say, look, I've either got to change what I'm doing, or I've got to do something else.
That's amazing. That's like, looking for the things that work versus the things that weren't working. And just even to have the insight, and I suppose, like you said, the pressure of having to actually create that change, because you had to, because of just, everything around you. But what's fascinating is how, I mean, this is one of the reasons I wanted to chat to you, because like everything you've learned through the experience of it, right? It's not necessarily like, you just went to a course and you studied it. This is, I know we've known each other for a while now, and I see, when you share your wisdom with me, it's like, damn, this guy's actually like experienced this and studied and uncovered it himself. That's why it's so like, what's the word? Real. So what was like the next step for you after that then? Like, what did you find evolved you even further?
Well, what evolved me even further was, which happens quite a lot in other professions, I suppose, but definitely happens a lot in the life insurance industry. I came across an organization called the $1 Million Round Table, which represents the top 5% of financial advisors in the world. And you had to earn 40,000 a year to qualify to go. So my goal was to qualify for that before I was 30, and only 0.5% did. So that was actually, I thought that was quite a big goal for me at the time. And I qualified and I went, and then I realized that was only the starting point. There was 3 different tiers within the $1 Million Round Table. There was something called core to the table, which was 150,000 a year. And then there was top of the table. That was £250,000 a year plus. And I just sat there when I'd met some of these people, and I was so into insurance, and I was such an evangelist, because I knew how good it was for people and how it was really an essential part of their lives. I wanted to really help people as much as I could. So I met these guys that were running top of the table, these white ribbons across them. It said top of the table. I didn't have a ribbon because I was just a basic entrant, if you like. And I said, what does that mean? And they told me about the top of the table, told me the top 1% and what you had to do to get there. And I just decided in that moment, I'm going to do top of the table. And that's what transformed me. But it wasn't what happened was my success in the life insurance industry led to me being asked by insurance companies to go and share my journey of success in the industry, especially mine, because it was so such a major change in such a short space of time. You know, people normally get there over decades. You know, I just suddenly got there in 9 months, and that fascinated people. So companies used to start asking me to come and speak, and I remember somebody said to me, well, how much do you charge? And I'd never had the concept of getting paid to speak before, and I just kind of I didn't have any words for that because I had no idea. I said, well, I don't know. I said, I've never charged. And they said, well, would you come and speak for us if we gave you £2,500? I said, well, yeah, of course I would. You know, that was quite a lot of money. And but it wasn't just down to the money. I had a great passion for speaking. So when I started speaking for insurance companies, I suddenly copped on to the fact that I could help a lot more people by speaking than I could by doing one-to-one with anybody. So I got this bug for helping people. I just seemed to have a gift for helping people. And I've been studying self-help for a while. And you mentioned that what I say to you is real, and you think, oh, this guy's actually experienced it. I'll touch on that briefly because I had a lot of frustrating experiences with books and seminars where people talk about a lot of things that sound great but don't work because they've read a lot of books and they've picked up this paragraph that sounds fantastic. Then they read another book and they take that paragraph and another paragraph out of another book and they stitch it all together for what sounds like the most unbelievable piece of information in the world. But it doesn't work because it's just been strung together. It's never been field tested. And it doesn't work. So I spent thousands going across the other side of the world to go to seminars, get all fired up and come back home to things that didn't work. And I found most self-help books were like that as well. I was studying limiting beliefs because I knew I was full of them. And I read hundreds of books on belief. And then I'd be waiting for them to teach me how to get rid of them and change them. And then I got to the end of the book and they never did, you know, so, and that was how I developed what I've developed that we're going to come on to later, purely for that reason. But it's very frustrating, you know, people put their faith in a book and it's, you know, most of them, unfortunately, are just a repeat of every other book that you've read, which is unfortunate because it doesn't do that industry much good. But then now and again, you find somebody that actually thinks outside the box, has experienced something, has lived it, used it, and actually can be useful to you.
Yeah. No, exactly. And you know what I find fascinating is like how that kind of it's like you've gone through stuff in life and then you hit something and then you've actually like spent the time to think, okay, well, how can I actually change what I'm doing to maneuver around this? And that I find really fascinating. I mean, like, you know, when you said you started looking at, you know, what you were doing different and you found out that it was the people you're having conversations with, but that was the people you felt comfortable with, right? So what shifted within you to talk to the people you felt uncomfortable with, but actually share stories with them? Like what went through your mind at that time?
Well, it came out of a desire to serve people, but I was a real evangelist with insurance because I really felt very strongly that they needed it, you know, and I had everything myself because I just believed in it. I watched lives fall apart that didn't have it, you know, so I was really passionate about making sure that people had it. And I just realized that just the way I was doing business with 90% of the people I was working with was actually a disservice to them. I wasn't actually helping them. In fact, I was putting them at risk by not insuring them because I wasn't approaching them in the way that they needed to be approached in order to help them do what they needed to do.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating what you shared there because, you know, with a lot of people when I come across, we chat to them and they're talking about sales and marketing. And, you know, we hear this, that all people have this negative experience towards the word sales and all this kind of thing. And it's like, well, actually, when you shift that to actually serving and you shift that, you're not selling anything, you're actually serving people. It's like the whole dynamic of everything you do changes, right? Because it doesn't feel like you're trying to sell them. You actually are genuinely trying to serve them now, you know, with something that's going to be useful for them, right?
The hardest part of my career was when I was trying to make sales. When you get into sales as a young man, I was only 22 years of age, all you're thinking about is getting the sale and putting money in your pocket. That's your motivation. All right. But people have a sixth sense and they know that, you know, so they'll repel you, you know, which they should do. Because if you're not, it doesn't mean you're not working in their best interest, but your interests are coming before theirs, if you know. And I read a book by Frank Bettger once, from the very first books I read, self-help books, if you like. It's an insurance book, and it was called How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling.
Oh, I love that book. Yeah.
Yeah, very first book I ever read. And I read that at 22 years of age. And he said, if you help enough other people get what they want, you can have everything you want. Now, that quote's been misrepresented as Zig Ziglar's quotes. It's like everybody ties that to Zig Ziglar, but it was actually Frank Bettger that said it. But I actually heard that, like sometimes you hear something and you actually get it, and I just thought about that, and it changed my focus from going to sell you something to get something for myself to getting you what you need, and I'd be getting paid as a byproduct. And moving from selling in that way made life a lot easier for me, because I found it really stressful. I found it really stressful to go into what was in some degree a confrontational experience for both of us, because I'm trying to get them to buy something and they're trying to resist buying it. This wasn't for very long, by the way. But when, I actually got to a stage where I felt I was sitting on the same side of the table as them. So instead of sitting in an adversarial position trying to get them to buy something, I would be the expert sitting on the same side of the table as you, and we're looking out at the world together about which of the companies are the best for you, what offers the best. And I'd say, well, this is what I do. And then they'd say, okay, we'll go for that. And then I put it together for them. So I stopped selling. The most I ever sold was when I actually stopped selling.
Wow.
When I just put my heart and soul into the person I was working with. And it was fantastic, because if I sometimes, because people in the end, which was really nice, the best compliment I think I ever had was, I used to talk very simply to people. I learned how to make the complicated simple. And I remember one guy just looked at me and smiled. He says, that's the first time in my life I've ever understood the concept of life insurance. He says, thank you, because it was so simple and easy to understand, that it just made it easy for people to do it.
Yeah. That's just brilliant. That's like, Bruce Lee pops to mind. They just change or play on his words where it's the art of selling without selling. Right.
But it is that, the thing is as well, everyone's adverse to salespeople, but at the same time, everybody is a salesperson. We're selling, even if you've got a job, you're selling yourself to your employer to keep you in that job every day that you're there. If you start messing about or not putting your time in and not doing the job properly, you're gone. So you've got to sell yourself every single day. And it's exactly the same thing. You just don't see it that way. Sales is what keeps the world going, everything, because it enables everything else. Everything that comes before, the production, the marketing, everything. That's the end result. And if you haven't got the end, you're not doing the end activity properly, then everything else falls like a stack of dominoes beforehand. But it's the way that you sell. I think it's because, no one wants to go to, like a pushy used car salesman, all that kind of thing. It makes everybody feel uncomfortable. It's not what anybody wants. I don't want it, but when you get people that are passionate about what they're doing and they believe in what they're doing from the core of their being, the real selling is done in the intention behind what you're saying and what you're doing. Okay. So you feel that intention from me. And then you talk about rapport before. Well, then you develop rapport only when that's, in fact, if you're asking me again what I think by rapport, you develop rapport only when you feel comfortable with somebody to engage with them. That's when rapport comes through trust.
That's right.
Because if you don't have trust in someone, what are you going to do with them? You're not going to do anything, are you? Because why would you do anything with somebody you don't trust, or you're not sure about their intentions? And that transfers. So if we, instead of trying to sell people all the time, if we look at what we've got and how it will make their life better, and show them, preferably in the form of a story, then they're going to see it. Exactly. There's one thing I learned very early on: people buy with emotion and justify with fact. Everything's emotional. Everything's about connecting with people on an emotional level. That's how we're moved.
Exactly. So you mentioned earlier a little bit about imposter syndrome, and that's something a lot of people bring up. Share a bit about that, because at some stage you felt like an imposter type of thing, but then that changed, right?
Yeah.
Share a bit about that.
Well, imposter syndrome is an interesting thing because everybody has it to some degree, and everybody experiences it significantly at least once in their life. For me, the challenge was the fact that I had it every single day, without a break, and it's a very painful thing. When you've got imposter syndrome, you don't feel that you've ever achieved anything under your own reasons to be successful or do well. It's nothing. It's just a fluke, by the way. When I used to race motorcycles, because I started racing dirt bikes when I was 12 years of age, which I bought my bike. I should do 3 paper rounds to get this old dirt bike that I bought. And then because I used to visit the abuse I went through, I used to visualize all the time. I used to visualize every single night before I went to sleep and see myself racing and smelling the smell of the oil at the event and all of that. And unbeknownst to me, I was programming my subconscious mind. And I'll tell you a really odd thing. At my very first motocross meeting, Scrambles it was called at the time, I was 12 years of age, and I'd never been in a race before in my life. And I was racing, and I was really confused. I'm racing around the track in a state of confusion. And I was thinking, what is it? What's going on here? I was only 12, by the way, and what I was thinking, I've been here before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and I was leading, like there was no motorcycles anywhere near me. I was way out in front. I was winning the race, and I couldn't work it out. I thought, what's going on here? I just thought to myself, I've been here before. And of course, I'd been there before 1,000 times in my mind. And every time I visualized at night time, I was, I don't visualize myself at the back of the pack coming last. Obviously, I used to visualize myself winning races. So that when I made that first starting line, I'd been on that starting line 1,000 times. And I used to, before I was too young to race, I used to walk to that track, and I used to walk around it, and I used to imagine how I'd go around the corners and how I'd go across the jumps, and I'd walk it hundreds and hundreds of times, as a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old boy. By the time I raced at 12, I'd walk that track thousands of times, and I'd visualized it thousands of times. And then, so that, that is, but the answer, extending from that, what we've discussed, what's that going to do with imposter syndrome? Okay, now every time I won lots of races, and this is what used to happen. I used to think, well, it was only because everybody else was having a bad day, or everybody else must have fallen off. And the time that actually one of the worst things, my friends took me to a fish and chip shop to buy me fish and chips to celebrate my victories, because they were all really into it with me and they loved seeing me win. And they bought me fish and chips and a can of Coke. And I remember choking on the fish.
Right.
Because I felt like I was deceiving them by taking their present to me for winning, because I wasn't really a winner. I was winning because everyone else was having a bad day, because they weren't feeling very well. It was never because I was the best, because in my mind I was nothing. So even though I'd managed to change my results by visualizing, I actually hadn't changed that part of my inner game on the belief side. I still didn't believe in myself. So you kind of think, well, that's kind of a contradiction in terms. I'm winning races, but I don't believe in myself. How can that be true? Well, because I was visualizing winning, but I hadn't dealt with the belief side of things yet, because I didn't. I was so young, I didn't understand it. But that visualization, we've spoken about this many, many times, is such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
I beat cancer with visualization. And I tell you something really, really strange, which we weren't going to talk about this, but I'll touch on it very briefly with you. My wife and I were watching a series called Brothers and Sisters, and it's about 5 series long, and there's 24 episodes in each one. But for some reason, the last series disappeared, and we never got to watch it. So we found it on Disney Channel the other night, and we just started watching it again. And Callista Flockhart, who used to be Buffy's vampire slayer or whatever it was, I don't remember. She was married to Rob Lowe, who was running for government, and then she found out she had cancer. But in the series, she had the exact cancer I had, large diffuse B-cell lymphoma. And she was stage 3, which is what I was. So they'd really researched this, the producers, but they actually picked an illness, which was, there's like hundreds of different versions of it, but they picked the exact one that I had. And then they were talking about a treatment, was the exact treatment I had. And I started to weep because it took me straight back there again. But one thing I never did at the time was I never Googled the illness.
Right.
I never Googled the prognosis of the illness, because, I'm a mindset speaker and a mindset coach, and beliefs is my thing now, I'm very successful about helping people changing their beliefs and companies and what have you. But that's my thing now. So at the time, I didn't want to put, if I looked at something and it said life expectancy 12 months, and because people believe what they see in print. So if I saw that in print, I didn't want to see that in print. My visualization was me getting better. I used to visualize nights on white charging through my cells, because I had blood cancer, my veins, and skewing the cancer cells. And then I'd feel euphoria in my body. But after watching that the other night, I decided to Google it, because I was misdiagnosed for 14 months. Right. And it was 14 months before I was discovered. The first time misdiagnosed by my doctor, who just kept telling me I was stressed all the time, even though I was lost 3 stone in weight and multiple other things, which were just so obviously cancer. And then when I got them to send me for a scan, and then they scanned me, and they actually scanned my testicles because I had an ache there. And I said, am I okay? Because you always push for a result while you're there because you're nervous. And she says, oh, you're absolutely fine. The scan just shows increased heat in that area. That means infection. And they gave me a 6-month course of antibiotics. But it wasn't an infection. I had cancer. I went back home. I had a gut feeling told me something was wrong. So I started looking on the internet, and I found a chap that had the same symptoms as me, but he didn't help me. He just had the same symptoms, no solutions. And I was just about to leave the computer, and I was just about to press the escape, and I was about an inch away, and then a doctor answered, which saved my life. He said, I don't like the look of this. He says, go to A&E. Don't tell them you've been diagnosed with something else, or they'll think you're a hypochondriac. Represent the symptoms, which is what I did. And a junior doctor, about 25 years old, felt my groin and everything, said, your lymph nodes are up. I don't like this. I'm going to get an oncology surgeon. I had no idea. Who told me I had cancer. I had cancer for 14 months already. Wow. Okay. Now, going back to this series that I watched with my wife last week, and we just happened to start it in that moment where she was diagnosed, and I Googled it. And I put in, how long can someone survive with lymphoma without being diagnosed? And it said, no one survives more than 12 months.
Wow.
And I was 14 months before it was discovered, and another 2 months before I got treated. So I was 16 months before I had any treatment. And I should never have lived. Now, can you imagine if I'd have seen that at the time? Wow. What that would have done to my mind. So, and I was visualizing without this information, that would have been destructive for me. So, as far as imposter syndrome is concerned, the visualization was a key thing for me. And, it's just very powerful.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, you shared some real insights there about intention, the level of detail you go into to visualize this stuff as well. I mean, and then you shared your story about, that. And is that the time around when you wrote your first book?
No, that was, well, when I first told you about the on the starting line of the dirt bike racing, I was 12. I'm 58 now, so that's, I don't even dread to think how far long ago that is. I can't even work it out. It's so far. But that's when I was using visualization from about 10 years of age, mostly to get over the abuse that I was through, because what I used to do was go to bed at 6 o'clock every night to get rid of the days. Because I had this thing in my head that everything would be okay when I got to 20.
Right.
So I used to go to bed as early as possible to get another day closer to being 20. And that's when I started visualizing, because I'd go to bed at 6:30 and I'd be bored out of my brains. So then I'd just go into my imagination, and I'd imagine the future. So I'd imagine this beautiful woman lying in the bed with a child next to her and another little baby in a cot. And that was my family in the future. And I used to visualize that every night. And then one day, many years later, I used to visualize that from about the age of 11 to about 18, when my parents finally got divorced. Didn't think about it again. Never thought about that vision again, which I did every day. And then I was 30 years of age, and I was trying to sell life insurance to 2 aging hippies who are smoking joints, smoking hash. And because they're so laid back, it's going on forever, this meeting. Normally I would have got irritated, but in the sea of smoke, I felt really relaxed and chilled, and I've no idea why that would have happened. And I eventually made the sale, and I got home at midnight, and I was getting changed in the bathroom, so I didn't wake my young family up, because we all slept in the same bedroom. And then I'll just go back slightly. When I was visualizing this from the age of 12, I used to see her and the children in the bedroom, in the bed and in the cot, but the room was bathed in an orange glow in the vision I had from that young age. Why an orange glow? I have no idea. But I used to imagine this room bathed in an orange glow. So I got changed in the bathroom so I wouldn't wake anybody up. And as I opened the bedroom door, I just felt like I'd been hit in the chest with a brick. And my breathing went really shallow, and I started to sweat, and then I started to weep. And I was just standing in the room looking at them, thinking, what's wrong with me? Am I having some kind of a breakdown? And what had happened was my wife had been out that day and bought a soft glowing orange lamp to have on in the bedroom, so that I wouldn't come in and kick the cot and kick the bed and wake everybody up, which is what I usually did, because you couldn't, it was a small room, I couldn't see anything. And so I stood there in the doorway looking at them. My wife was lying in the bed. My older daughter, who was about 2.5 at the time, was lying next to her with her arms flailed above her head. And next to her was in the cot was my newborn baby, a little girl with a little tuft of hair on top. And the room was bathed in an orange glow.
Wow.
But it wasn't similar to the vision that I had every day from the age of about 9 or 10. It was exactly the same, you know.
Right.
And I was so moved by that, and I really got to understand the magnitude of the power of visualization. And I suddenly became aware of how I'd used it all the way through my life, and how anything I'd got out of life was because I visualized it happening, but not once. Doesn't work when you do it just once. I did it repeatedly every single day, and it was such a powerful force in my life. It was unbelievable. And and ultimately it saved my life. So the abuse I went through, I'm actually grateful for now, because it pushed me to learn things and do things. It taught me to, well, it didn't teach me. My goal was to survive, because I had 3 attempts on my life by the time I was 20 years of age. One of them was by my father. So I just the vision, it got me through everything. It got me through everything. So I was evoking tools to survive, creating them. I wasn't creating them. I was tapping into things, functions of the mind, because visualization is just a function of the mind.
Yeah.
We don't know anything. Most people don't know anything about. We know we imagine. We use our imaginations as children, but by the time we get to school, they knock it out of us. All you hear is, get your head out the clouds, get out of my classroom if you're not going to concentrate. And they stop that. It's knocked out of you. So by the time you reach secondary school, you don't use your imagination at all. But you're actually, what you should be doing is fostering that, because that's where your creativity comes from.
Yeah.
And that's why so many people struggle with creativity, because the education system has knocked it out of them.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, wow. And then when did your first book come about?
Well, I wrote my first book in 2018, An Unbreakable Spirit. I'd been talking about writing that book for probably 20 years. And that came about, really, the writing of it, an embarrassing moment, because to get some accountability, I'd said to my family New Year's Eve the year before, I'm going to have my book written by Easter. And my oldest daughter, her dream had always been, I'd always been putting into my children, you can be whatever you want. And from the age of 4, my oldest daughter said she wanted to be a Paris showgirl. And she was actually a Paris showgirl at the time. So we'd driven down to Paris to see her for Mother's Day with my wife, and my mum came with us. So we were all having dinner in the Eiffel Tower. And then quite innocently, my daughter says to me, she says, "How's the book coming along, Dad?" Really expectantly. And I hadn't started it.
Right.
I'm supposed to have it done by now. And I realized, God, am I going to really go through life like this? And so I went home. I actually wasn't even thinking about it. I was sitting with the laptop on my lap.
Yeah.
And I just started typing. And it's no intention. I hadn't written an outline to the book or anything. I didn't really need to write an outline, because all I needed to do was go into my imagination, go back to 4 years of age. And because I was such a visualizer, because I visualized all my life, it's something that I'm just naturally into, the way I work. I just went into my imagination, and I put myself at a certain, when I was 4 years old, and I visualized being there. And then I just walked back through my life.
Right.
And as I walked through my life, I typed it.
Right.
And at the time, I'd only just beaten cancer. And because I was such a late diagnosis, I had to have something called intrathecal chemotherapy, which is horrendous. You go partially blind for 2 out of 3 weeks. Your sight comes back in the 3rd week, and then on the 4th week, you go and start it again. And do that every single month for 6 months. So I spent most of that not being able to see and projectile vomiting. So when I started writing, it affected my memory because the intrathecal is in the spine, so they drain your some spinal fluid out and replace it with chemotherapy.
Right.
Because it's blood cancer. The only way you can protect the brain from a tumor is by going up the spinal cord, because chemotherapy won't penetrate the protective layer of the brain, which
Right.
makes sense. But it affected my memory really badly. So when I wrote the book, I couldn't take ages to write it, because I just have to read everything from scratch every single time I picked it up to start, because I wouldn't remember. So the only antidote to that was just to write it non-stop. So
Right.
I
Right.
wrote the book in 30 days.
Okay.
I had one day, I remember it was a Wednesday, I wrote 3 chapters. I started writing at 6:30 in the morning, finished at 10 o'clock at night. I'd written 3 chapters and 17,500 words.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, and I needed to do that so that I didn't repeat myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the book's been really well received. I mean, it's been really well received. It's done really, really well. And it's helped a lot of people as well, which is fantastic, which was really the purpose of the book. People used to say to me, is it a cathartic exercise? Does it help you rid yourself of all those things that happened to you? Well, it wasn't really cathartic for me at all, because in my mind, I dealt with that a long time before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I'm sure at some level it did help me and was useful in some way, but it wasn't necessary, and it wasn't for that purpose that I wrote it. It was really turned out to be a book on resilience and mindset is what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And like you say before, well, this guy's experienced it. That's why I find what he says to me so interesting. But that's exactly what it was. It was
Mm-hmm.
it was experience. I'm
Yeah.
just showing my experience, but it was real world experiences.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. And then now you currently, you've just finished doing the imprint phenomena, which is another really interesting book, because you've also invented something like this really good belief bracelet, right? Let's talk a bit about that. Like, how did that come
Yeah.
about, and what does that do?
Well, do you know what? Bearing just go back slightly to remember, I had chronically low levels of self-belief. So I had no belief in myself whatsoever, which was a curse for me when I got into the life insurance industry. And as you know, we've covered, I had these 2 little girls. Now, I knew at a subconscious level that self-belief was the most important thing. I knew that self-belief was the driving force in our lives. I knew it. And we all know it, by the way. Subconsciously, we know that's the truth, because all of us have had said to us at some stage in our lives, well, you just need to believe in yourself. We've said we're having a bit of a challenge with this, and I really want to do this, and I'm not sure how to do it. And somebody always said to us, you just need to believe in yourself. And then you immediately felt, you'll remember this yourself, and anybody listening to this would have had this experiences, that when you were told you just needed to believe in yourself, we felt this sense of euphoria fill our body. And we go, yes, yes, because we know inside that we need to believe in ourselves. It makes perfect sense. That's why we get so excited. But the trouble is, no one knows how to do it. And so, I remember people saying to me all through my life growing up, you just need to believe in yourself, Mark. And I'd say, yes, yes, that's fantastic. I know that's what I need to do. How do I do that? And then I'd just be met with this blank stare. And people say, well, I don't know, but I just know that you do. I said, well, I know that I do as well, but I just don't know how to do it. And no one ever knew. And the bracelet came about from this, because I just read my little girls their bedtime story. So, they're very young, they're preschool. Well, one's preschool, one's just started primary school. And I'm reading them their bedtime story. And I sat there and I was actually quite distressed, because at that stage of my life, I had no self-belief whatsoever. I knew self-belief was the most important thing in the world. And I knew that above everything else, my children needed to believe in themselves. But I couldn't do it for them. I couldn't teach them how to believe in themselves, because I just didn't know at that stage how they could do that. There's obviously more to it than just a bracelet, but what with the bracelet, I'll just cover that side of it. So I found myself asking myself a question. My children were in these bunk beds. So their little things are in their bunk beds. I've just read them this story. I'm sitting in the chair and I'm just looking at their little innocent faces lying on the pillows. And I got so upset, because I thought, these children need to learn how to believe in themselves. I can't do it for them. I've actually brought 2 children in the world that I can't serve. I can't teach them how to believe. And it really, really got to me. And then just out of nowhere, I asked myself this question. I wonder if there's a physical way to get people to believe in themselves, which is really a ridiculous question when you think about it. It's a ridiculous question, but great things come from ridiculous questions.
Yeah.
And I just fell asleep in the rocking chair, and I had this dream. And I had this dream about this little girl who was struggling with maths at school. And her father asked her what was the matter. And she says, "Oh, I'm no good at maths, Daddy. The teacher says I'm the worst in the class. And she says, if I don't buck up my ideas, she's going to send me out and let me do something else in the hallway or read a book, because she doesn't want me in a classroom where I can't do anything," which was horrendous for a teacher to say that. This was just a dream, by the way, you know. But horrendous thing to be said. So her father said, "Right, we're going on a trip in the morning." And they flew to India, in the village where he grew up in. And they climbed up this mountain. It wasn't like a mountain, it was more like a big hill. There's a meandering hill when they got to the top, there was a cave. And they called out, and this little tiny man came out with long grey hair down to his belly button and a little loincloth. And they hugged each other because he remembered the man from when he was a little boy, and invited him into the cave. And as they sat down, the father began to talk about his daughter's problems, that she didn't believe in herself. And the old wise man listened. And he picked up this box in the hole in the wall of the cave, and he came down, sat it down, and he brushed all the dust off it, and he opened it up. And there was this shiny bracelet inside. And he went and gave it to the little girl, and she put it on her wrist. And in the background, you know that you watch a film, you watch The Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner, where he built that baseball field. And he kept hearing the voice saying, "If you build it, they will come."
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Well, in my head, in my dream, that was happening, but with different words. And the voice that was like a ghost in the background of this story that's unfolding in my dream was, "It's all in the words, but you must impress the words."
Wow.
And it kept saying it, because this voice kept saying, "It's all in the words, but you must impress the words." And I just remember in my dream thinking, what the hell does that mean? It's all in the words, but you must impress the words. It made no sense to me whatsoever. And then the dream moved on a little bit, and he took the bracelet, and it's on the little girl's wrist now. And he said to her, "Press that bracelet down in the middle and hold it for 10 seconds, which she did. And then she just removed her finger and just sat there looking at the old man. And he said, "Now move the bracelet away from that spot and reveal what's underneath the bracelet." And she looked down, and the word belief was in her wrist, as like imprinted in the skin, pressed into the skin. And he said, "What does that word say?" to the little girl. And she said, "It says belief, sir." And he said, "Where is the belief?" And she said, "It's on my skin, sir." And he said, No. He said, "The belief's not on you. The belief is in you. That's all you ever needed to have, was the belief within you." He says, "Now you can do maths." And, you know, and then there was an earthquake in the dream, and the cave started to shake. And it wasn't really an earthquake. What it was my wife shaking me awake. So I woke up, and I'm having this wonderful dream, you know, and I woke up, and but you know what it's like when you've had a dream, you can't remember anything about it.
Yeah.
I kept trying to, like, I was getting headaches. It's like I was trying to pull the dream back into my consciousness, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't remember anything about it. And then the following evening at dinner time, we're sitting down with my daughter, my oldest daughter, who's just like in her first year of school, looking really glum. And my wife says, "What's the matter with you today? You're not your usual self." And she says, "I can't do maths." She says, "Teacher told me I'm the worst in the class."
Whoa.
So and as soon as she said that, the whole dream came back to me, and I got goosebumps all over my arm.
I'm getting them now.
Yeah, I get goosebumps all over my arm. And every time I tell the story, I get goosebumps. So I went to my wife and I said, "Do you have an old bangle?" So she found this old bangle for me, and I went to my shed in the garden, which was full of brand new boxes of do-it-yourself drills and things, because everyone bought me do-it-yourself stuff, which I was never any good at and never wanted to touch. So it looked like a robbery from a DIY store. There's all these things in boxes that never been opened. And I cut these little this word believe out of metal letters, out of a mold that I had for fishing weights. I used lead and just made it to raise these letters. And I stuck them on the inside of the bracelet. This was in the days where super glue actually worked. Do you remember? It doesn't work anymore, but it was actually when it worked. So it took me about a day just to get them to stick inside without coming off of my fingers and like that. And I put it in my pocket that evening in my pajamas, and I wrote down the story that day of what I've just told you about the wise man in the cave and the little girl who couldn't do maths. And I told her the story, well, both of the children the story, but aimed at the daughter that was having trouble with the math. And she was sitting there listening intently. She was so involved, because we do with stories, we're wired for story, like, you know. I've actually been furnished with a story to go with this. And I read the story to her. She said, and I never forget it. She said, she looked a bit glum again, and she said, "Oh, Daddy," she says, I'd love a, and I didn't have a name for this at the time. And she says, oh, Daddy, she said, I'd love a magic bracelet like that. And I said, well, I said, I've got it for you. I took it out of my pajama pocket and I put it on her wrist. And I said, it's yours now. She says, it's the only one in the world, which it was, because I'd invented it that day. And she put it on her wrist. She goes, oh, and she pressed it down and she pulled it back and the word belief was on there.
Wow.
And I said to her, where's the belief? And she says, and she smiled because she knew the story. And she says, the belief was in me, Dad.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
so far that, you know, this is 25 years ago and I did nothing with it. I kind of, you know, I used the tool with them and it changed them. I mean, my daughter went from not being able to do maths to the top quarter of the class to having a top job in HSBC Bank as an investment specialist, you know, from a little girl that couldn't do maths. But I did nothing with it, Jatinder. And during lockdown, both my daughters had moved out. One went to work. She went to work in Dubai. My other daughter got married and they bought a house. So we thought we'd sort the house out during lockdown. And I was sorting out under my daughter's bed, and I just caught my eye, and this bracelet was sticking out the top of a box in her bed. And I pulled it out, and I just remembered the story, and I got goosebumps again. You know, I remembered what happened that night and how it changed her life. You know, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do something with this now. And it was lockdown, so I wasn't allowed to work. We weren't allowed to do anything. So I invented the bracelet. I actually created the bracelet, which took about a year because I had to design it, send it off, get someone to design it and manufacture it. Then it would come back. The words weren't long enough to make an impression. Then they'd come back too sharp and they'd cut you. Then they'd have to wait another 3 months because it was a 3-month turnaround every single time. And then the third time it actually did work. They put letters on back to front so you couldn't read it. You know, and all these challenges that we face. While I'm waiting for that, I've written the book, The Imprint Phenomenon, which teaches you how to change beliefs and how to use the bracelet. I've written the Fast Start Guide. I'd created a coin, a special coin you use to do exercises in the book as well. And I'd also created this beautiful box of affirmation cards, which are about 40 of the most powerful affirmations in the world, some of them which I'd written as well, which you do the bracelet, you press the bracelet, you see the word believe, and then you pick up an affirmation card that said, one of them, for example, would say, now that belief is within me, I can do this. But the blank is at the end. You put in whatever you're having a challenge with.
Right.
But you know, we've chatted about this a lot, you know, and there's a lot more to this than just a bracelet that makes an imprint. You know, there's a lot of psychology in that, and a lot of psychologists are actually using it now as an intervention tool with their clients.
Right.
When I first met a psychologist that came across it, which I told you about, she was blown away by this. She said, I can't believe somebody's made a physical tool to change beliefs, and she uses it very successfully with her clients. But you know, it's what I've done with this is because 95% of what you and I and everybody listening believes was created within them by the time they were 7 years of age. It's called the imprint period. That's why the book is called The Imprint Phenomenon, and I call this the imprint bracelet or magic bracelet for children. And it works with adults just as well, because you know, with the affirmations, using it with that, it's you give yourself a tool to work with. Now, as I said, 95% of your beliefs are in you by the time you're 7 years of age, the imprint period from birth to 7. And you remember the quote from Aristotle: if you give me the child at birth, I'll return the man to you at 7. All right. We were talking before we came on air today about cliches and how we don't actually understand them, or we don't think about them because we've heard them so many times. They mean nothing. Yeah. And that's one of those quotes. You hear that and you think that's a cool quote, but you don't think anything more. It's such a significant quote because it's the truth. You know, what he was talking about was he understood how to create beliefs in children and how significant those first 7 years were. Now, you know, my first 7 years were being told I was nothing and I'd never be anything and no one would ever want me. So you can see where my challenges came from. Because that once you accept something, because if it's an authority figure, a parent or teacher says something to you, you accept it as the truth. Okay. Once you accept it as the truth, it becomes a belief. Once it becomes a belief, it becomes the driving force in your life. But the trouble is, unless you're fortunate to have psychologists as parents, which only a very small people do, they know what the imprint period is, but no one else does. So we're just instilling beliefs within our children, good and bad, carelessly saying things that we don't comprehend the ramifications of our words, because those little brains, those spongy little brains, are accepting everything you say as the truth. And once they accept it as the truth, it becomes a belief. Once it becomes a belief, it becomes a driving force in their lives. So what the most significant part of what I've done here is I've made something which is a subconscious act, and I've brought it into conscious awareness for everybody. So then people read the book and they know, they understand how significant this period of time is for their child. You know, I'd say up to 10 years of age before they go to secondary school, because that's when the influence really changes. But when you're doing this with children, consciously aware of it, and you're going through the affirmations with them, you're actually doing something together consciously, and you're consciously instilling limiting beliefs, or sorry, not limiting beliefs, but empowering beliefs that will change the course of their lives.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, okay, you know what? People probably, if they're listening, they're like, where can I get one from? Where can I get one from? You know, if they are interested, what's the best thing for them to do?
Well, the simplest route is through the website. It's www.thebeliefdoctor, all one word, thebeliefdoctor, and then .net, and then /get belief. So www.thebeliefdoctor.net/get belief. So if they go there, that will take you to a page that tells them all about it.
And there's a little video on there as well, which shows how it works, which I think, check it out definitely, because I think it's an amazing product.
It's the best thing that I've ever done. It's anything I've learned, it's the best thing, because it makes everyone consciously aware of the significance of beliefs in their own lives as adults, because it helps them change the limiting beliefs they've got, and more importantly, even not more importantly, but children that have no beliefs, because we're born with zero beliefs until it's put into us. But it actually teaches people how to make empowering beliefs and be consciously aware of what they're saying. And that's really significant, because the average child hears the word no 400 times a day. That's about 14,000, 12,000 times a month, and it's 144,000 times a year. So that's if you hear, and that sounds like ridiculous, but remember, you were saying, you won't say no once, you go, no, you can't do that. So it just adds up. And when you hear no all the time, you think the world isn't for you. And as you get older and become an adult, the word no changes into I can't.
Wow.
So you don't do it. So it transmutes to that. So the impact of that, what you had through your childhood told to you, goes on to impact your life in different ways. That's why we're walking around not achieving what we want to achieve. It's got nothing to do with it's not possible for us. We just don't believe it's true for us. We believed it wasn't true because of something we've heard as a child. It became true for us, and now it's a driving force in our life, but it's driving us down the wrong path.
That reminds me of that quote by Napoleon Hill, right? The one that he says, wherever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve.
Well, that's exactly the truth.
Yeah.
But you have to believe it first.
Yeah.
A lot of people, philosophers say to you, and something, and a lot of speakers and a lot of people with great wisdom say to you, thought precedes everything. Yeah. It's actually only partly true, because thought does precede everything in the beginning until a belief is created. But once you have the belief drives what you think. So once you believe you're not up to the task, what are your thoughts going to be?
Exactly. Well, the story related to that, right?
Yeah, because that's what you believe. So you're going to act out the belief. It becomes a script for your life. So the thought does come first, but only until a belief is made. Then the belief takes over and drives the thoughts that you have. Which is the car crash for most people, because as well-meaning as your parents are, they didn't understand this. And we all get tired, and we all get frustrated, and we all say things we shouldn't say. Some of us have it to the extreme, like I did, but but it doesn't have to be to the extreme like I had it. It could be just, people are tired, they've got too much on their plate, so you're just saying no all the time, or you're just putting beliefs in, or they hear things like you might hear money is the root of all evil, or you might hear things about, oh, because you're dealing with your parents, the most expensive time of their life with young children, and they've got no money. So what's predominantly on their mind then is the fact they've got no money. What do they talk about? How little money they have. Okay. So you go through your childhood listening to lack statements about money, which gives you a limiting belief about money, and then wonder why you have money issues when you become an adult. You know, everything affects everything else. Everything counts, Jatinder. You know, so, you know, talking about the bracelet, this is a way to change all of that.
Yeah.
It's so, I didn't even realize how significant it was till I finished all of this, because it started off as just a bracelet to help my children. But then I understood the psychology of what I'd actually done.
Yeah.
And I've made the unconscious conscious. So that you can constantly now choose the beliefs that you have or create in a child or for yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and that is the pivotal point. You know, the bracelet's a tool, but it's the psychology behind it that makes it work as a tool. You know, I think it's going to be one of the biggest self-help tools ever, you know, and I hope so, not just because of how wonderful that would be for me, but for how wonderful it will be for anybody that comes to use it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you know, just hearing that, I'm sure parents out there, people here, no, even just parents, but anybody comes across it, be like, that sounds good. I mean, I think it's brilliant. I've seen the thing, right? And I'm like, this is totally amazing. And do you know what? I wish you all the luck with that. And let's get it out there, man. Let's get it out there, right? And no, Mark, you know what? It's been brilliant. I mean, what I'm taking away from all of this is you know, the power of story and how you can use story to connect with audiences. I mean, because you've shared everything through story, and I was like engaged and like intrigued and pulled in, and it, you know, like you said, it's your intention behind it. It builds trust, you know, it builds credibility. You actually learn and relate from it. It takes the human mind to such a deep space. And I think that's a fantastic place to be. And you know, I'd like to chat to you forever because you know you're sharing some brilliant wisdom. I mean, is there any last words you want to share before we sign off today?
The only thing I hope that people take from this interview that we've done today, that anything is possible for them. What I don't, you know, we hear that quote, 90% of people, even more, go to their grave with their music to lend them. You know, my mission is to make that different for people. I'm not even doing it for them. They do it for themselves. Ultimately, we're driving the car, you know. But I would love people to embrace this and use it on themselves, and if their children, if they have any, and the psychology that goes with it, and read the book, because it will transform your life. And I just want people's lives to be transformed. You know, I love people. I love to see people succeed. I see so many people living a life of lack, and it's purely down to the beliefs that they hold. But the life that they desire, okay, and I really want people to hear this, the life that you desire is just on the other side of your current beliefs. Just on the other side of your current beliefs. Wow. And all you need to do is to bridge that from where you are to where you want to be, is change the beliefs that you have.
Wow.
And this will help you do that, you know. And that's it. You know, we're on one side of a glass wall where what we want's on the other side, and we don't know how to break through it. It's that, it really, when you understand the concept, it's that simple. But most people never learn it, and they just, you know, it's just horrendously sad, because we're capable of so much. We're capable of so much. And you know, I had my motto for my children growing up was, don't just dream it, be it. So they still say it today, but don't just dream it, be it. And the way to be it is to change the beliefs that you hold about yourself. And that's the door that opens that's the key that opens the door to potential for you.
Wow. Thanks, Mark. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best thing for them to do?
They can email me at info@thebeliefdoctor.net, or go to the website, thebeliefdoctor.net. But I mean, I take emails of anybody that wants to write to me about this. So info@thebeliefdoctor.net. I'll happily receive you. I reply to everybody. So anybody listening this that's got any questions about what you've listened to today, please drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you.
Definitely. And on that note, Mark, thank you very much. And you know, I'm conscious of your time as well, and I'm sure we'll get on another one in the future. And until next time, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Mark, and Signing out.